Welcome to an online content webcast for kindergarten that is intended to provide teachers and those who support them in the classroom with background information as a foundation on the intended standards being addressed specifically in this presentation. This webcast will focus on several kindergarten standards beginning with two of the winter holidays, specifically Martin Luther King Jr. Day and President's Day. Notice the verbs identify and describe in this standard. Teachers will be able to observe students' understandings of these standards as they are encouraged to orally communicate as they analyze and investigate the use of primary source images from the time period that each holiday was established. Identify these two national holidays, and describing the people and/or events surrounding them also ties in nicely with geographic understandings by explaining the customs and celebrations of families and communities on these holidays. This standard relates to the culture of groups of people and in showing students how people think and feel about the importance of these holidays. You'll also want to discuss how a group of people act and celebrate these national holidays in our country. This provides students with an example of how we are a special group in our country and in our local communities. Teachers will need to continue to discuss and model for students throughout this study how the specific holidays are celebrated as a special event on the designated days in January and again in February. A learning target for students in this standard is I Can Tell About Martin Luther King Jr. Day. This holiday is celebrated every year on the third Monday in January in the United States of America, which is around King's birthday, January 15th. Now for some background knowledge about this holiday. Martin Luther King Jr. was a very important leader in the civil rights movement. He was known for his peaceful protests and efforts. His most famous speech, I Have a Dream, was given from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. In 1968, he was assassinated. President Reagan, in 1983, signed the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday into law, and it was first observed in 1986. It wasn't until 2000 that all 50 states officially observed this holiday. To celebrate, many cities organize days of service and hold marches or parades to celebrate this special day. The primary source on the left shows Martin Luther King Jr. on the day of his famous I Have a Dream speech. Make sure your students notice the crowds and discuss the significance of this speech. Why was the Lincoln Memorial a good venue for such an event? The primary source on the right shows one memorial for Martin Luther King Jr. Have students discuss why there are memorials, statues, and streets named in honor of this important man. This slide shows a few possible read-alouds for kindergarten about Martin Luther King Jr. Day. All of these read-alouds are written as narratives, but with support, your students will greatly benefit from the story itself. Remember to use books that you feel complement the standard and are appropriate for your own classroom. A learning target for students in this standard is I Can Tell About President's Day. We celebrate President's Day on the third Monday in February each year in the United States. Now a little background information about the holiday. President's Day was originally established in recognition of George Washington. It was originally celebrated on February 22nd, which is Washington's actual birthday. In fact, it is still officially called Washington's birthday by the federal government. For most of the 1800s, there was an unofficial observation of Washington Day. But in 1879, Washington's birthday was signed into law. The Uniform Monday Holiday Act moved President's Day to be celebrated on the same Monday each year, as well as moved to a date closer to Lincoln's birthday. Although we still see President's Day as a day that honors mainly Washington and Lincoln, we now also include all presidents on this day. People celebrate President's Day in different ways. Some groups do patriotic reenactments, while some schools require teachers to focus on the accomplishments of Washington. And the primary sources shown on this slide are two very easily recognizable images of Washington and Lincoln. Feel free to choose images of your choice. This slide shows a few possible read-alouds for kindergarten about President's Day. All of these informational texts are kindergarten appropriate. They are rich in vocabulary and in primary sources. You decide how best to incorporate them in your own classroom. Teachers may also refer to how things change over time while others stay the same. How did the two previous primary sources differ? Allow opportunities for comparisons to be made with students using vocabulary of the standard, such as now and long ago, to make connections to how things change and how things stay the same. This also reinforces for young learners a historical understanding by comparing life in the past to life today, and encourages discussion about possible ideas and questions about how these events and holidays have developed over time. The chart on this slide shows one example of a way to analyze a primary source. I use this chart weekly in my room. I show a primary source, My students know that they cannot shout out responses. At first, they simply notice everything they can possibly see on the primary source. It might be as detailed as the clothing someone is wearing or as broad as noticing the landscape. I call on students to say what they see until we have exhausted the list. Next, students focus on what they think. When they respond, they must start with the words, "I think." Students have to be taught to be respectful of others' opinions. We can disagree, but we still respect all possible responses. Finally, students are asked, "What do you wonder?" This question is the most challenging prompt. Students must think about what they know and build on it. After students have had an opportunity to share, I give them background information on the primary source. In the beginning, I had to heavily model appropriate responses for my students. After several weeks, my students were able to independently think through this entire process. Within standard SSKH2, we will focus specifically on the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, and the White House. Please pay close attention to what the standard is asking students to do. The verb identify is used here. For each symbol, students should also be able to identify the symbol as well as associate the symbol with the people associated with it. For example, we should associate the Lincoln Memorial with Abraham Lincoln and with President's Day. We should associate the Washington Monument with both George Washington and President's Day. Finally, we should associate the White House with our current president, Donald Trump, and President's Day. One of our national symbols is the Lincoln Memorial. The Lincoln Memorial is a tribute to our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. He is associated with helping to end slavery in the United States. He was assassinated on April 14, 1865, and by March of 1867, there was already talk of Congress building a monument to honor our recent president. The statue itself is made of Georgia white marble and weighs a total of 175 tons. The statue was shipped in 28 separate pieces because of the weight and size. The statue of Lincoln was originally intended to only be 10 feet tall, but after discussion it was enlarged so that now it stands 19 feet tall from head to foot and 19 feet wide. The primary sources on this page show a close-up of the statue of Lincoln, including the inscription above his head, and then the front of the memorial in its entirety. Also, show the memorial from different perspectives, such as an aerial view, so that your students will be able to identify the memorial from any angle. This slide shows two possible read-alouds for kindergarten about the Lincoln Memorial. The first book listed is very much appropriate for kindergarten, and it has great photographs in it. The second read aloud is a little more wordy, but with the right support, it has some very valuable information in it. Another resource to use would be the National Park Service. Above is a snippet from the website. You can explore the photographs and read interesting facts about the memorial. The website is interactive and even has video clips for your students to watch. Another national symbol is the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument is a tribute to our first president, George Washington. The Washington Monument is Washington, D.C.'s tallest structure. It is 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches tall and has 50 flights of stairs. The monument weighs more than 81,000 tons. The Washington Monument opened to the public on October 9, 1888. It took over a century to plan, and it wasn't completed until the 21st president was in office. Although it is the tallest structure honoring Washington, it is definitely not the only one. The primary sources on this slide both show the Washington Monument. The primary source on the right also shows the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. This primary source will allow students to see how the Washington Monument is positioned in relation to the Lincoln Memorial. This slide shows a few possible read-alouds to teach the Washington Monument. The book listed is very much appropriate for kindergarten and it has great photographs in it. Another resource and read-aloud to use would be the National Park Service website. A snippet from the website is shown on this slide. You can explore the photographs and read interesting facts about the monument. The website is interactive and even has video clips for your students to watch. Another one of our national symbols is the White House. The White House has been the official residence and workplace of the President of the United States since John Adams. Construction started in 1792 and was finished in 1800. In 1814, the British Army set the White House on fire. Reconstruction began almost immediately. The White House is on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. It has over 140 rooms and has 6 floors. There is a total of 55,000 square feet. Some of the amenities include a tennis court, bowling alley, movie theater, and swimming pool. The primary sources on this slide show the White House from two different perspectives, one being an aerial view. Have some discussion with your class about what makes the structure so recognizable. Focus on key features of the White House. This slide shows a few possible read-alouds for kindergarten about the White House. All of these are written as informational text. Please feel free to choose books that you feel complement the standard in your classroom. The last standard covered in this presentation falls under Government and Civic Understanding. Standard KCG1 asks students to demonstrate an understanding of good citizenship, specifically focusing on how rules are made and why they're made, as well as why rules should be followed. When teaching about good citizenship with this standard, the focus is really all about rules. Anytime rules are mentioned to kids, they usually have a negative reaction. After teaching this standard, you want your students to understand the importance of rules and how they make the world safe around us. Imagine a classroom without rules. Imagine roads without rules. Have the discussion with your students and let them think about how different our world would be. The primary sources on this slide show two very important rules of the road. After explaining what each sign is asking people to do or not to do, have your students think of why these rules are so important. What other rules of the road are they aware of? They should easily be able to understand the importance of these rules. Once this understanding is in place, your students should be able to transfer this knowledge to school rules too. This slide shows a few possible read-alouds for kindergarten about good citizenship. The first three books are written as informational text with appropriate vocabulary terms. The last book, What If Everybody Did That?, is presented more in a narrative format. It provides scenarios that allows students to see how the world would be different without rules. Please see this list as suggestions and know that you are encouraged to use books that you feel are appropriate in your classroom. When teaching standard SSKCG1 to your students, it helps when you provide activities and situations that will really bring this standard to life. One suggestion might be to look at different class rules throughout your building. Have your students have some discussion about the similarities and differences from room to room. After some discussion, have your students decide which class rules are absolutely necessary for their learning and safety in and out of the classroom, and write a proposal as a class to teachers or the principal even about their new and improved class rules list and the reasoning behind the rules that were chosen. Another suggestion might be to take a rule and have your students pretend for a few minutes that the rule was no longer in existence. Please make sure you choose a rule that won't put their safety in danger. For example, the rule raise your hand to speak or listen to others when they are talking. Having your students see a classroom without even one rule will help them see the impact that rules have in our lives and why they are completely necessary. Thank you for viewing this online content webcast for kindergarten.